Ambassador Kim Jae-minute walked slowly toward the massive crystal podium at the center of the Galactic Council chambers. Her black diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed, but her hands trembled slightly as she carried a small silver device. Around her, the enormous circular amphitheater stretched up toward a glass dome that showed the stars beyond. The chamber was alive with sound. Representatives from over 100 different alien species filled the tiered seating areas. Some looked like giant insects with clicking mandibles. Others were made of living crystal that glowed within a light. A few floated in special atmosphere tanks, while mechanical beings sparked with electrical conversations. All of them were chatting in their native languages, creating a symphony of chirps, buzzes, electronic beeps, and musical tones that echoed off the polished walls. Jae-minute had attended these sessions for 12 years. She knew every delegate by name, understood their customs, and had helped solve countless disputes between their worlds. Today would be different. Today would be her last day here. The Vorthak delegation sat in their usual spot near the front. Their insect-like bodies were covered in bright blue exoskeletons, and their long antennae moved constantly as they spoke in rapid clicks. They had been particularly dismissive of human suggestions lately, calling them primitive mammal thinking just last week. On the opposite side, the Christek representatives stood motionless like living statues. Their bodies were made of pure silicon that pulsed with soft purple light when they communicated. They were ancient and proud, often treating humans like children who needed guidance. Chancellor Vextar of the Dominion occupied the largest platform. His 4 powerful legs supported a body covered in dark green scales. His species had conquered dozens of worlds through military might, and they respected only strength. He had laughed openly when humans proposed peaceful solutions to territorial disputes. Jae-minute reached the podium and activated the universal translator. The device would carry her words to every species in the chamber, converting them into sounds, colors, or chemical signals that each alien race could understand. "Esteemed delegates," she began, her voice steady and clear. The background chatter slowly died down as beings turned their attention to her. "I come before you today not with proposals or mediation offers, but with a final statement." The Vorthak delegation's antennae stopped moving and pointed directly at her. This was unusual. Humans always came with carefully prepared peace plans or trade agreements. Their antennae twitched with curiosity as they leaned forward in their seats. The Christek representatives pulsed brighter, their light shifting from purple to a questioning blue. They had grown accustomed to human diplomats arriving with solutions to problems they hadn't even realized existed yet. Many conflicts had been prevented by human foresight and careful planning. Other species also showed interest. The floating nebula beings swirled faster in their gas tanks. The mechanical synthetics increased their processing sounds. Even the proud Serpentine Empire, who rarely acknowledged other species, raised their cobra-like heads to listen. Effective immediately, Jae-minute continued, her voice growing stronger, humanity withdraws from all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council and its member species. We are recalling our ambassadors, our trade negotiators, our military advisors, and our peacekeepers from every corner of known space. The effect was instant and dramatic. The chamber erupted into chaos. Shocked gasps came from species that could express such emotions. The Vorthak delegation began clicking so rapidly it sounded like machine gun fire. The Christek representatives flashed bright red, their usual calm shattered. Electronic squeals and beeps filled the air as mechanical species processed this unexpected information. Some delegates stood up from their seats. Others floated higher in agitation. The noise level rose to nearly deafening levels as over 100 different species all tried to speak at once through their translators. "Order! Order!" called the council's ceremonial speaker, but nobody listened. Chancellor Vextar rose to his full impressive height on his 4 legs. His green scales rippled and changed color, showing his anger and disbelief. This was a display of dominance that had intimidated countless enemies across the galaxy. "This is preposterous," he roared, his voice booming over the crowd. "Humans cannot simply abandon their duties. You have responsibilities, treaties, obligations." Other voices joined his protest. The Christek elder pulsed angry red light as he spoke. "Your species accepted these roles freely. You cannot withdraw without proper procedures." The Vorthak queen clicked rapidly in agreement. "We have contracts with human mediators. Legal bindings that cannot be broken." Jae-minute waited patiently for the noise to die down slightly. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes were cold. She had heard these arguments before, usually when her people were being told what they must do rather than being asked what they could do. "Watch us," she said simply, her voice cutting through the chaos. She raised the small silver device she had been carrying and pressed a single button. Across the galaxy, in hundreds of star systems and thousands of space stations, human diplomatic facilities received the same signal simultaneously. Emergency lights began flashing red. Automated voices announced immediate evacuation protocols. Human ambassadors, trade representatives, military advisors, and peacekeeping forces all received the same message: return to human space immediately. Within minutes, human transport ships that had been waiting in nearby systems began moving toward diplomatic stations. The withdrawal that had taken months to plan was now beginning in earnest. J-Minute looked around the chamber one final time. These beings had dismissed human ideas, ignored human warnings, and treated human diplomats as servants rather than partners. Now they would learn what the galaxy looked like without human involvement. She turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind 12 years of careful relationship building and diplomatic service. Behind her, the chamber continued to echo with angry voices demanding explanations she would never give. Captain Lee Minute-Ho stood on the bridge of his starship, watching through the large viewing window as the final human transport vessels moved away from Kepler Station. The massive space station had been home to thousands of human diplomats, traders, and peacekeepers for over 20 years. Now it looked empty and cold against the backdrop of stars. His ship was the last one to leave, ensuring all human personnel were safely evacuated. Minute-Ho had served as a military advisor here, helping to keep peace between the hegemony forces and the coalition fleet that shared this sector of space. For 5 years, he had prevented conflicts through careful communication and patient negotiation. "Sir, we have a problem," called out Park Soo-jin from her communication station. She was young but experienced, having worked as a translator and liaison officer between different alien species. Her face was pale as she looked at her screens. "What is it?" Minute-Ho asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The hegemony and coalition fleets are moving toward each other. Their commanders are demanding immediate withdrawal from the neutral zone." Minute-Ho watched as bright flashes appeared in the distance. The first weapons fire had begun. Without human mediators to arrange meetings and find compromises, the old enemies were falling back on the only language they both understood: violence. "Sir," Soo-jin continued, her voice rising with worry, "we're receiving distress calls from 17 different sectors. The Arcturus trade agreement just collapsed, and the vegan border dispute has gone hot." The captain closed his eyes briefly. The Arcturus agreement had taken human negotiators 3 months to create, carefully balancing the needs of 6 different species who all wanted access to the same rare minerals. The vegan border dispute involved 2 planets that had been arguing over a small moon for decades until human arbitrators found a sharing solution. "Set course for Earth," Minute-Ho ordered. "Maximum speed." Behind them, Kepler Station was already being damaged by stray weapons fire as the 2 fleets engaged in full battle. On Earth, Director Choi Ha-won sat in the Strategic Command Center deep beneath the capital city. The room was filled with dozens of monitors showing different parts of the galaxy. Each screen displayed information about trade routes, diplomatic missions, and peacekeeping operations that humans had been managing. Ha-won had gray hair and tired eyes from years of coordinating humanity's role in galactic affairs. She had helped design many of the systems that kept different species working together instead of fighting. Now she was watching those systems collapse in real time. Called analyst Nam Dae-eun from her workstation, "The Zephyrian merchant fleets are refusing to honor their contracts. Without our arbitration clauses, they're claiming breach of trust. The spiral arm economy is in free fall." Red warning lights began appearing on screen after screen. Each light represented a crisis that human diplomats would normally handle quickly and quietly. Trade disputes, border conflicts, communication breakdowns, and resource arguments were all erupting simultaneously across known space. "The Torvik Mining Consortium just declared war on the Stellar Collective," reported another analyst. "They're fighting over mining rights that our mediators settled last year." 3 more trade routes have been closed due to piracy," added a third officer. "The merchant guilds are too busy fighting each other to organize protection convoys." Ha-won rubbed her temples as she watched the galaxy tear itself apart. Humans had been so deeply involved in keeping peace that most species had forgotten how to solve problems without outside help. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Council headquarters, emergency alarms were ringing constantly. The massive crystalline chamber that usually hosted orderly debates was now filled with angry, confused, and frightened representatives from dozens of worlds. Chancellor Vextar tried to maintain order, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The Galactic Council was discovering that many of their communication systems had been designed and maintained by human technicians. Without those experts, different species were struggling to understand each other. The Harmonic Collective, a race that communicated through musical tones, was trying to explain their position on a trade dispute. Their beautiful songs filled the air with complex melodies that carried deep meaning to their species. However, these same songs caused severe pain to members of the Crystalline Alliance, whose silicon-based bodies resonated with certain frequencies. Several crystalline delegates collapsed, their bodies cracking from the harmful vibrations. Medical teams rushed to help them while other species began arguing about whether music-based communication should be banned from the council chambers. In another section, the gas-based nebula riders were attempting to communicate through chemical releases. Their method involved creating clouds of different colored gases that carried information through smell and chemical reactions. This worked perfectly for their species and others who could process chemical data. However, these communication chemicals were toxic to oxygen-breathing species. Several delegates from mammalian and reptilian races began coughing and choking. Emergency ventilation systems activated, but the damage was done. 3 representatives had to be hospitalized, and others refused to remain in the same room as the nebula riders. The council sessions that were supposed to address the growing crisis became disasters themselves. Species that had worked together for years, with human translators helping them communicate, now found themselves unable to even talk to each other safely. Old grudges that human diplomats had carefully managed began surfacing. The Serpentine Empire remembered territorial disputes with the Mammalian Federation from decades past. The Mechanical Syndicate recalled trade disagreements with organic species that had been resolved through human mediation. Without neutral human voices to remind them of shared interests and common goals, former allies began seeing each other as enemies again. Ancient prejudices and cultural misunderstandings, long buried under successful cooperation, erupted into open hostility. Within 72 hours of the human withdrawal, the Galactic Council had held 3 emergency sessions. Each one ended worse than the last, with more species walking out in anger and several diplomatic relationships completely severed. The galaxy was beginning to burn, and there was no one left to put out the fires. 3 months had passed since humanity withdrew from galactic affairs, and the situation was getting worse every day. The Galactic Council met in emergency session after emergency session, but they could not agree on anything. Species that had worked together for decades were now enemies. Trade had almost completely stopped, and small wars were breaking out across the galaxy. In desperation, the Council turned to the Lyrian Confederacy. The Lyrians were known throughout the galaxy as brilliant scholars and scientists. Their universities were famous, and their libraries contained the knowledge of 1,000 worlds. Surely, the Council thought, such intelligent beings could replace the humans as mediators. The Lyrian lead diplomat was named Scholar Veltaran. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to glow with intelligence. He had studied the art of negotiation in theory for over 50 years and had written several books about conflict resolution. He was completely confident that his superior intellect would solve any problem. The first major crisis he faced was a dispute between the Corthian Republic and the Valerian Empire over mining rights to a small asteroid field. Both species claimed the asteroids belonged to them, and their fleets were already moving toward battle positions. Scholar Veltaran studied all the legal documents, historical records, and territorial maps. He calculated the mineral values, analyzed the economic impact, and created what he believed was a perfectly logical solution. According to his plan, the asteroids should be divided based on mathematical formulas that considered population size, economic need, and historical presence in the region. Captain Yoon Jae-sung watched from a hidden human observation post located in a nearby nebula. His ship was completely cloaked and undetectable, allowing him to monitor the situation without being seen. The humans had placed several such observation posts throughout the galaxy to watch what happened after their withdrawal. The Lyrian is calling both fleets to a meeting, reported Lieutenant Kang So-young from her sensor station. She was young but experienced, having served as a cultural liaison before the withdrawal. He's transmitting his solution to both sides. Jae-sung watched the scanner displays showing the positions of the 2 fleets. The Corthians flew ships that looked like giant metal beetles, while the Valerians preferred sleek vessels shaped like ocean creatures from their water world. Both groups had stopped moving toward each other and were reviewing the Lyrian proposal. What's their response? Jae-sung asked. So-young monitored the communication channels. The Corthians are angry. Very angry. The Valerians are also rejecting the proposal. Why? So-young studied her cultural database. The Lyrian completely missed the point. For the Corthians, those asteroids contain metals that are sacred to their religion. They use them in holy ceremonies. For the Valerians, the asteroids are in the burial ground of their ancient kings. Both species see this as a spiritual matter, not an economic one. Jae-sung shook his head. The Lyrian treated it like a math problem. Exactly. He calculated resource distribution without understanding what the resources mean to each culture. Within minutes, both fleets rejected Scholar Veltarin's proposal. The Corthians were insulted that anyone would suggest dividing their sacred metals. The Valerians were outraged that their ancestors' burial site would be treated as mere property to be split up. Instead of preventing conflict, the Lyrian proposal made both sides angrier than before. The Corthian commander declared that the Lyrians were enemies of their faith. The Valerian admiral announced that anyone who would desecrate burial grounds deserved no respect. "They are opening fire," So Young reported quietly. The battle that followed was massive. Both fleets had brought reinforcements, expecting negotiations to fail. Hundreds of ships engaged in combat around the disputed asteroids. The weapons fire lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. "The Lyrians are calling for a ceasefire," So Young said. "But nobody's listening." The battle lasted for 6 hours and ended with heavy losses on both sides. Several asteroids were completely destroyed by weapons fire, making the whole dispute meaningless. Worse still, the conflict spread as allies of both species chose sides and joined the fighting. "They don't get it," So Young observed sadly. "They think diplomacy is just applying universal logic to every situation." Back on Earth, President Han Soo-min sat in her office reading daily reports from across the galaxy. The news was uniformly bad. Every day brought word of new conflicts, economic collapses, and diplomatic failures. Her aide entered with another stack of reports. "The situation in the Outer Rim has gotten worse. The Dominion of Korth is facing a full-scale rebellion." Han Soo-min looked up with interest. The Korth had been particularly dismissive of human diplomatic methods, often calling them primitive and emotional in council sessions. Their chancellor had publicly laughed at human negotiation tactics just weeks before the withdrawal. "What happened?" she asked. "Their economy completely collapsed when human-facilitated trade agreements fell apart. The outer colonies are starving because food shipments stopped. 3 provinces have declared independence, and the military is split between loyalists and rebels." Han Soo-min nodded grimly. The Korth had built their entire economy on trade deals that human diplomats had carefully negotiated. Without those agreements, their advanced technology couldn't be exchanged for basic necessities like food and raw materials. Meanwhile, a desperate delegation from the Galactic Council was approaching human space. The group included representatives from 12 different species, all hoping to convince humanity to return and save the galaxy from chaos. Their ships reached the edge of human territory and immediately encountered automated defense platforms. The message was the same one that every approaching vessel received. Diplomatic relations suspended. Departure from human space required within 24 hours. Any vessel remaining after this deadline will be considered hostile and destroyed. The delegation tried broadcasting desperate pleas. They offered trade deals, territory, and even membership for humans as full equals in the council. But the only response was the repeated warning message. After 23 hours, the delegation had no choice but to leave. As their ships turned away from human space, they could see Earth in the distance, peaceful and untouched by the chaos consuming the rest of the galaxy. The galaxy continued its descent into darkness, and the beings who had once dismissed human capabilities now understood what they had lost. 1 year had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. Councillor Thekma of the Vorthak Collective stood in what used to be the main shopping district of Kepler Station. The massive space station had once been the greatest trade hub in known space, where millions of beings from hundreds of worlds came to buy, sell, and do business. Now it was a graveyard floating in space. Thekma's insect-like body trembled as he walked through the twisted metal and broken glass. His blue exoskeleton was cracked from stress, and his antennae drooped with sadness. Around him lay the remains of shops, restaurants, and meeting halls where species from across the galaxy had once worked together peacefully. The disaster had started with a simple trade dispute between 2 merchant groups. Without human mediators to help them talk through their problems, the argument had grown bigger and bigger. More species had taken sides. Within days, what should have been a minor disagreement had become a massive battle involving dozens of fleets. The weapons fire had damaged the station's main power core. When it exploded, the blast killed over 3 million beings and destroyed the economic heart of this entire sector of space. Thekma picked up a broken piece of metal that had once been part of a human diplomatic office. He remembered laughing when the humans had first suggested creating neutral meeting spaces for different species. Unnecessary, he had called it. We can handle our own affairs. Now he understood how wrong he had been. Deep in the shadows of a damaged corridor, intelligence agent Shin Bora watched Thekma through her hidden camera. She had been living undercover on various alien worlds for the past year, gathering information about the galaxy's collapse. Her reports back to Earth painted a picture of complete disaster. Bora was small and quiet, which made it easy for her to blend in among different alien populations. She had changed her appearance many times, sometimes pretending to be a refugee, other times acting as a low-level worker. Most aliens barely noticed individual humans anyway, which made her job easier. She activated her secure communication device and began her final report to Earth. This is Agent Bora with yearly summary report. 17 active military conflicts are currently ongoing across the galaxy. Complete economic collapse has occurred in 43 star systems. 12 member worlds have experienced total governmental breakdown. She paused to watch Thekma stumble through the wreckage. The Dominion of Korth, which once controlled over 30 planets, has split into 7 separate warring factions. Each group claims to be the rightful government, and they are fighting a civil war that has already killed millions of their own people. Bora remembered when the Korth had been proud and powerful. Their chancellor had stood up in the council chambers and called human negotiation methods weak and ineffective. He had boasted that his species knew how to solve problems through strength alone. That chancellor was now dead, killed by his own military commanders when their empire collapsed. Trade routes that took centuries to establish have been destroyed in months. Bora continued her report. The spiral arm economic zone no longer exists. Most species have returned to primitive barter systems within their own territories. She moved quietly through the station's ruins, documenting the destruction. In what had once been a beautiful garden where different species would meet informally, she found only dead plants and broken fountains. Meanwhile, on the surviving capital world of the Galactic Council, the few remaining delegates gathered in emergency session. The great crystalline chamber that had once held representatives from over 100 worlds now contained fewer than 30 beings. Chancellor Vextar stood at the central podium, but he looked nothing like the proud, strong leader he had been a year ago. His green scales were dull and cracked. His 4 powerful legs shook with exhaustion. His voice, once commanding enough to silence entire debates, was now barely a whisper. "My fellow beings," he began, struggling to be heard. "We must face the truth that many of us have tried to ignore." The remaining delegates listened in silence. Many of them were injured or sick from the various conflicts. Others were the last survivors of governments that no longer existed. "We were wrong," Vextar admitted, his voice breaking with emotion. "We dismissed them. We called them primitive. We treated their contributions as expected service rather than invaluable expertise." In the back of the chamber, young historian Zaktel nodded sadly. For the past 6 months, he had been studying archived recordings of old council sessions. What he had discovered made him sick to his stomach. Over and over again, he had watched human diplomats propose solutions to problems that the council ignored or rejected. The humans would warn about potential conflicts, suggest preventive measures, or offer compromise solutions. The other species would dismiss these ideas as too simple, too emotional, or too focused on minor details. Then, months or years later, Zaktel would see the exact same problems explode into major crises. The council would desperately try to implement the same solutions the humans had originally suggested, but without human insight and cultural understanding, these attempts always failed. The humans warned us about the Kepler station situation 8 months before it happened, Zaktel had reported to the council. They proposed a neutral arbitration system that could have prevented the whole disaster. We voted down their proposal because we thought it was unnecessary. The Korth Civil War could have been avoided if we had accepted human recommendations about economic diversity, he had continued. They told us that the Korth economy was too dependent on single trade agreements. They offered to help create backup systems. The Korth called this mammalian overcaution. Now Chancellor Vextar stood before the ruins of galactic civilization and spoke words that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years earlier. "I propose that this council vote on a formal apology to humanity," he said. "We must admit our mistakes and beg them to return to galactic affairs." The vote was unanimous. Every surviving delegate agreed. The message was carefully written and sent to Earth through quantum communication. It contained admissions of error, promises of change, and desperate pleas for help. The response from Earth was complete silence. 18 months had passed since humanity had left the galaxy to manage its own affairs. Now, Ambassador Kim Jae-minute walked through the corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters once again. But everything had changed. The hallways that had once been filled with busy delegates from hundreds of worlds were now mostly empty. Broken windows had been repaired with mismatched materials. Entire sections of the building remained closed because there weren't enough species left to use them. Jae-minute wore the same black diplomatic uniform she had worn when she announced humanity's withdrawal. Her steps echoed in the quiet corridors as she made her way to the main chamber. Behind her walked Dr. Oh Sung-minute, a tall man with gray hair who carried a small device that would project holographic images. The great crystalline amphitheater looked sad and empty. Where hundreds of delegates had once sat in tiered seating areas, now only 50 beings remained. Many of the surviving species had only 1 or 2 representatives left. Some alien races had been completely wiped out by wars or economic collapse. Chancellor Vextar sat in his usual place, but he looked like a different being entirely. His once proud green scales were now dull and scarred. His 4 powerful legs could barely support his weight. When he saw Jae-minute enter, his eyes filled with something that looked like hope and fear mixed together. The other delegates turned to watch as she walked to the central podium. There were nervous whispers in dozens of different languages. Many of these beings had never expected to see a human diplomat again. Councillor Thekmar of the Vorthak Collective leaned forward in his seat. His blue exoskeleton was still cracked from stress, and his antennae moved nervously. He had spent the last years seeing his people's colonies fall apart without human trade agreements. The Christek representatives pulsed with faint light, much dimmer than they had been in the past. Their crystal bodies had lost much of their shine during the months of crisis and conflict. Jae-minute reached the podium and activated the universal translator. The device hummed quietly as it prepared to convert her words into the many different forms of communication that the remaining species could understand. Delegates of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice clear and strong in the quiet chamber. We've been listening. A ripple of surprise went through the gathered beings. Many had assumed that humanity had completely cut off all contact with the galaxy. We've watched your struggles, your failures, your learning process, Jae-minute continued. Her tone was not cruel, but it wasn't particularly warm either. We maintained observation posts throughout the galaxy. We saw what happened when you tried to manage galactic affairs without us. Dr. Oh Sung-minute stepped forward and activated his device. A massive holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red areas marked conflict zones, while dark regions showed systems where governments had collapsed entirely. We spent our time in isolation developing solutions to the problems we had been quietly managing for decades, Dr. Oh explained. Problems you never knew existed. The holographic display changed to show trade route maps, communication networks, and diplomatic connections. As the delegates watched, they could see how deeply integrated human involvement had been in every aspect of galactic civilization. You see, Dr. O continued, we weren't just mediating disputes that you knew about. We were preventing hundreds of conflicts from starting in the first place. We were maintaining economic stability through thousands of small agreements and adjustments. We were translating not just languages, but cultural concepts that different species couldn't understand about each other. The display showed specific examples. Here was a trade dispute that humans had solved before it became violent. There was a territorial disagreement that human diplomats had prevented from escalating. Everywhere the delegates looked, they could see human involvement in maintaining galactic peace and prosperity. Chancellor Vextar struggled to his feet, his legs shaking with the effort. Ambassador Jae-minute, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, we understand now. We know what we lost. Please, tell us what we must do. Jae-minute looked around the chamber, studying each delegate carefully. These beings had once dismissed human capabilities, called human methods primitive, and treated human diplomats like servants. Now they were begging for help. The terms are simple, she announced. But they represent a complete change in how humans relate to the galactic community. Dr. O activated a new display showing a proposed new structure for the Galactic Council. First, humanity returns as full partners, not service providers. We will have equal voting rights on all council decisions. Second, mandatory respect protocols will be established and enforced. The days of any species treating human representatives as inferior are over. Third, shared decision-making authority means that major galactic policies cannot be implemented without human approval. The chamber was completely silent as the delegates absorbed these terms. Many of them looked uncomfortable. These conditions would give humanity power that no single species had ever held in the council. Furthermore, Jae-minute continued, human diplomatic methods will be taught to all council species. Our cultural liaison programs will become mandatory for all representatives. And any species that returns to the old patterns of dismissing or disrespecting human contributions will be immediately expelled from the council. She paused and looked directly at Chancellor Vextar, then at Councillor Thekma, and finally at the Christek Elder. You have a choice, she concluded, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Accept these terms and begin rebuilding together, or continue managing galactic affairs without us. But understand this, there will be no negotiation on these conditions. Take them or leave them. The debate that followed was brief. Every species that had survived the chaos of the past 18 months knew that they could not afford to refuse. The vote was unanimous. 6 months later, Captain Lee Minute-Ho stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Kepler station. Through the large windows, he could see construction ships from dozens of different worlds working together. Human engineers directed the project, but alien workers contributed their specialized skills and knowledge. In the station's main corridor, he watched a mixed group of beings working side by side. A human diplomat was teaching proper negotiation techniques to a young Vorthak representative. A Christek engineer was learning human construction methods from a human technician. Species that had been enemies a year ago were now cooperating with genuine mutual respect. Minute-Ho smiled as he watched this scene. The galaxy had finally learned a hard but important lesson: never take your most valuable allies for granted. Humanity had returned, but this time, they had returned as equals.